Welcome back. You're listening to The Hill by Thieves Theatre. I'm Gabriele.
I'm Nick, and we're Thieves.
So, this is going to be our final episode. We'll come back periodically with some updates, so we hope that you'll stay looped in, but this is the final weekly one and sort of the end of our story. Today we're going to tell you about the arrests that were made in Mr. Lee's murder and what we know about all of it. We'll talk about our final months on the Hill, leading up to the day that it was finally razed. Unbelievably, it stayed up for over a year after Mr. Lee's murder, with Spencer there and everything, right? And then we'll also tell you what happened to the residents on the Hill as far as we know, and to some of the non-residents that were peripherally involved and kind of central to documenting the story, though.
Yeah, and at the end of the episode, we will reflect on how creating this podcast has intertwined our past and present lives.
Yes, all of the synchronicities, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a certain full circleness to it.
Right. At the personal, metaphysical level, the never-ending mystery of it all.
Exactly.
But first, about the arrests that were made in ADA Greenbaum's investigation of the arson murder of Mr. Lee. According to news reports at the time, there were two arrests. One was for a drug dealer named Nelson Diaz, the person who allegedly set the fire. Mm-hmm. And the second arrest was for Gerald Fawcett, the person who allegedly ordered the fire.
Yeah, the drug lord, right? But, all right, so we did some research on this recently and found no mention of Nelson Diaz at all, the guy who said it. No record of his arrest ever having gone to trial. We conjecture that he was given immunity for testifying against Gerald Fawcett, the drug lord.
Right. And last episode, I talked about how ADA Greenbaum had vigorously dismissed my allegations about corrupt police being involved with the drug traffic that was going on at the Hill.
Not just allegations. You witnessed it.
Yeah, I know. He called me a liar. Yeah. And he was treating me like I was a suspect or criminal in this all when I told him about the payoffs and the ones I had witnessed, right?
Yeah. And
at the same time, Spencer, the drug lord, he was trying to prove to me that the fire was not drug related at all. For whatever reason, each of them in their heads, I was either on one team or the other for them, right? And each were simultaneously and alternately suddenly intimidating me or soliciting information from me. Information
you didn't have.
No, I had no more information than they already knew.
Yeah.
And I imagine that each of them was in league with one or two or more corrupt cops.
Yeah.
Probably the same ones. It was my conjecture now that it was these corrupt cops that got Greenbaum the conviction he needed for his career or for whatever, right? And also kept whatever arrangement they had worked out with Spencer.
With Spencer.
Yeah.
Because they clearly had an arrangement.
Somebody did.
Somebody did, right. Exactly. Which is why Spencer was so dying to get that footage of you, filming the cop on the take.
Right.
Right.
Exactly, right.
But all right. So Joel William Bill Greenbaum. That's how his name appears in his obituary. He just died last year, and incredibly, there's a paragraph in his obituary that seems to validate all these suspicions that we have about his kind of willful blindness towards police corruption back then. So let me read from that obituary, because it's crazy. Remember, this is a private obituary. This is not from like some newspaper or some official thing that was written, right? Quote, although derogatorily given the name Blue on the Bench by a certain defense attorney who had a dislike of him and noted his friendship with a number of NYPD officers, Bill took it in stride. Always valued these friendships, and it would even be later noted by District Attorney Morgenthau, this is the obituary, that it, quote, couldn't be completely accurate, unquote, since at the time of his retirement in 2005, he was only active assistant district attorney who had prosecuted both a cop killer and a corrupt police officer, unquote.
Right.
This is in the obituary.
Right. And note that it said it couldn't be completely accurate.
By Morgenthau.
Partially accurate, maybe.
The DA
but
for years here in New York.
Yeah, so this was in his obituary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable that someone thought that his obituary was appropriate praise to address, you know, allegations like
to
this. To
prosecute this, so to speak.
Right. And so anyway, Blue on the Bench Greenbaum, true blue friend of the NYPD, convicted a drug dealer.
Yeah.
And was it Spencer's rival drug dealer? I, in my mind, if it was corrupt cops working with Spencer, then it seems likely. And it seems just as likely that he gave immunity to the actual arsonist who did it, right?
Yeah.
In order, I mean...
They need convictions.
Right. And
they don't even care what for, what specific thing.
Well, that conviction, let's read from that, because there's an appeal of that conviction that came up in '95, a couple years after all this happened.
Yeah, June of '95, this is from.
And that's People versus V. Fawcett, which is the one who allegedly
ordered it.
Right. So I'll read from it. Just after defendant's case on murder and arson charges had been sent to a trial part, the prosecutor, that'd be Greenbaum,
right,
indicated at bench conference that his case was weak in light of the background of his core witnesses, who had extensive criminal records, were substance abusers, and had made deals with prosecution in exchange for their testimony, which would probably have been Diaz, the guy who set the fire, right? Yeah. When the trial justice asked the prosecutor why he did not simply dismiss the case, the prosecutor responded that he could not do so unilaterally. The trial justice then suggested, quote, if that is the case, if it is the case that is going nowhere, why don't we save ourselves the time and trouble and have him waive a jury and go that way?
Waive a jury trial. Why don't we have him waive a jury trial? Right?
So counsel then obtained defendants. So I guess the defendant's counsel obtained Fawcett's Spencer rival drug dealer, right? His agreement to waive his jury.
Right.
But without inquiring whether any promise had been made to the defendants regarding the outcome of the case.
This is quote unquote.
Right.
You're still
unquote.
Quoting.
Right, right.
Know, without inquiring as to whether any promise had been made to the defendant regarding the outcome of the case.
And then the trial justice subsequently found defendant guilty of murder in the second degree.
Right. In other words, Fawcett thought he was going to get off if he waived his jury trial. So he waived it, but he didn't get off. He was railroaded.
Well, well, he's also a drug dealer.
Yes, he is a drug dealer.
So that's what so.
But it has nothing to do with Mr. Lee's case.
No, it doesn't. No, the whole arrest and trial was of this drug dealer was a sham. I mean, orchestrated by, in my mind, corrupt cops through a compliant prosecutor.
Blue on the bench prosecutor.
Right. And of course, Spencer also had manufactured his story to try to divert stuff where he said Dee and Cinnamon had paid $400 for a fire meant to hurt Myra.
And that was really weird because you followed Dee and Cinnamon. We mentioned that last episode. All the way to the precinct. And they didn't go in. They didn't go inside.
Wow.
Whatever that theater was about.
Was there any truth in either of these concocted narratives?
No.
No. The true story was, as you know, is impossible to discover. Back then, my investigation, right, just... well, it literally drove me crazy.
Yes.
And I mean, today, looking back at it, researching it, it just makes me so angry and frustrated that there's so much corruption and nobody really did anything about it.
In fact, in general, our final months on the Hill were annoying and frustrating, sort of the kind of petering out of it all. And everything is still annoying and frustrating as you dredge all this up, right? So last episode we told you about, at the end of that chaotic day after I found Nick. We finally came together, and I found you crying inside the teepee. And then that same evening, we took down the cover and the drawings, and we just left the poles, and we gave away our belongings, and we left the hill for what we thought would be forever, right? So we slowly began a new life. For instance, we bought a brand new car, first time in our lives.
First new car, right? All we had were vans before that for my man with van business. So half a dozen of them probably, different beat up vans. And I went to Dallas, I remember, to buy that car. Yeah, you know. So my family lived down there in Texas. And so I went there in large part to connect with the quote unquote normal me, the part of my life, the whole of my life, and try to put in context what had happened at the Hill. And I also reconnected with the Undermain Theater. I had been down there right before we went to the Hill and worked with them down there after we had done Trash, the City, and Death. They had also done a Fassbender piece, and so we had connected back then. And I told Kat, the
artistic director,
right, that and the rest of the ensemble, that I wanted to try to become normal again after this experience. And they said, well, first thing, you better do something with your hairstyle, because I still had that,
appear normal.
I still had that crazy haircut, bald, and
I think it was like an anti-mohawk. You shaved down the center and left everything on the sides long.
Yeah, before that it had been what they used. Well, anyway,
rat tail.
No, it wasn't a rat. Something like that.
In any case,
some kind of stupid.
They said start with your hair.
Right.
And then we started to fix up our apartment, and we went away on weekends, and we tried to shake this sense of doom that it was too late and we were going to die. But the Hill continued, as it always had. And we would periodically drive by it, and the poles were still there like this skeleton, you know. And then finally we were bothered by a sense of having given up and having run away, and we felt we needed to do something. So we decided to create a memorial teepee for Mr. Lee. The owner of a canvas warehouse who had once sold us waterproofing compound for the original teepee, he took an interest in our work, and when we asked him about the price of canvas, he decided to donate it. So I made another teepee out of regular rolls of vinyl covered canvas, which turned out to be not a good material, and we'll tell you why.
Well, it's a good material, but not in this case.
Not in this case. Not for our purposes.
Not for the Hill.
No, not for the Hill. We'll tell you later in a minute why. Our friend Valerie came up with a perfect design for the cover. It was based on your vision that you had about the eagle and the turtle that we told you about last episode. And it also had the sun and the moon in it, you know, Tortuga del Sol, Tortuga del Luna, and the symbol of Eagle's Point, which is that circle with the plus sign inside it.
Yeah, and it was a big undertaking to paint it, you know, to paint this huge canvas cover for the teepee. And we did it down at Coney Island, USA's basement.
Yeah.
I mean, we had this long-standing relationship with Dick, the artistic director, and Valerie. She was the designer down at Coney Island.
Dick Zigan and Valerie Haller.
Right. And, you know, they were both good friends. And Valerie's new cover design turned out beautiful.
Oh, and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
It is brilliant.
Right. Well, it's gone now.
No, I have a rug.
Yeah. But it's not a teepee cover.
No, it's not a teepee.
Anyway.
We'll tell you in a minute.
Right. The original teepee, you know, so we had the original teepee. It was dedicated to
Wounded Knee victims
and disenfranchised today. But this new cover was now a memorial solely for Mr. Lee.
Yes.
And or probably more precisely to a monument to our personal grief on it. And,
yeah. So meanwhile, Art Forum had come out with an article. And this was really weird because for somebody in the business of looking closely, this critic got virtually everything wrong. You know, I don't know what the hell he was looking at in 91.
Well, he came there December 91 when we were on our trip, so.
Right.
So we weren't even there.
We weren't even there, no. But, you know, right. To summarize, he described the teepee as the homeless, as the homeless having thrown it up organically, you know. I guess he didn't see 17 25-foot long trees and 78 US government mailbags sewn together. It was just really weird. And it was super irritating by the time this article came out, right? Because art writ large was just so much bullshit to us at this point.
Right after everything, right? And on that art writ large, I remember John, the owner of the store, who donated the canvas for us for the new teepee cover. He wanted to donate unlimited canvas because he had a great idea. He envisioned something he called the homeless nation, and he would donate canvas, and we'd build all these little teepees that we would put on
street corners.
Public spaces in New York, and each one would have a homeless nation on it, which we thought, well, it sounded interesting, but interesting to somebody other than us now.
For somebody.
Yeah, it would have been interesting back when we originally did it,
Maybe.
But now after this experience on the Hill, we were done with that.
Yeah, exactly. So. But John, the owner of that store, is probably the only one who to this day, or I'm not sure what happened to him, we couldn't really find him, right?
No, couldn't find the store.
Who had a decent picture of this new cover. Part of us was just so removed from everything that we were doing that we didn't even bother documenting anything. And I remember feeling like if I took pictures, that it would feel like, I don't know, disrespectful to Mr. Lee, you know, that it would then be art and it wouldn't be a memorial. It was irrational. I don't know why.
No, well,
but to this day, all we have is a Polaroid. One Polaroid I took.
Right.
That's it.
And, you know, I mean, it's funny that we didn't have the same qualms when we were taking pictures of the Wounded Knee Memorial. And I mean, this sort of puts that in highlight, right? Because now we're feeling this thing and we never felt it back then.
Because it was so personal to us.
Now it's personal to us, a real memorial, I guess. And the other one seems almost cast as something different now in our minds. Especially, yeah, in a lot of ways. You know,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
But I mean, this, you know, this is not a great, it's certainly not equivalent, but any artist who makes like the Vietnam Memorial or something, it's no less meaningful and important to them, even though it is a work of art.
And it's, yeah, and it's not, they might not even know anyone personally who it...
Yeah, exactly. It was irrational, but
yeah.
I don't know. We just didn't want anything to do with art anymore.
Well, we had done everything.
Yeah, well, right. At this point, we had done everything that we proposed, quote unquote, right? Artistically proposed, like a play inside the teepee, exhibited at various galleries, landscaping with a garden, a short film. We never did do the production of Prisoner of Love, but we did do a reading from the book in conjunction with an art exhibit.
Right.
So, yeah.
But we, you know, all these proposed and accomplished theater and social actions, by this time felt sort of like, in our mind, as trivial pursuits, really. Almost meaningless when placed inside the whole context of having lived up there and our life with our friends and neighbors. Yeah. And yet I did go into a correspondence with Dick Hebditch.
Yeah.
And the editor of Art Forum, right, where he put it in there, because at this point now that we weren't up there, no longer living up there, I was going up there daily almost, but not living there anymore. We wanted to get the record of our time there.
Straight.
Yeah, get it straight.
Honest.
Right.
Be honest about it.
Right, and have our pseudo-identities as artists come out.
Transparency.
Yeah, and be as transparent as possible about what we've done there. Everything that led up to this memorial of Mr. Lee, which we now wanted it to be, right? But mostly I think we were also trying to understand what happened by telling the story to Dick, this objective observer.
Yeah, right.
And see what he had to say about it. Right?
And he seemed like a good one, right? So Dick Hebdige is still a respected media theorist and sociologist and a professor of art and media studies at UC Santa Barbara. His work is associated with the study of subcultures and their resistance to mainstream society. Right. So
apt kind of critic.
Ideally, he was perfect to examine and document us and look at what we were doing. If he would have looked, right. Which he, you know, I don't want to make fun of him.
No, wait. Can we say we were trying to make anonymous and what he saw was exactly what we wanted people to see?
In some ways, he was the best.
Well, validation of what we were trying to do.
Yes.
Which was this obscured kind of whatever.
The fact that he saw naive art in this
right.
was kind of great.
You know, and I remember our correspondence as being friendly. He expressed both his embarrassment and amazement that artists had erected this teepee.
Yeah.
And the why behind it, right? And his last letter to me had a $50 check in it. And
poor Dick.
Ostensibly, it was to cover the postage on some documentation we had sent him, you know, a couple dollars in postage or whatever. But probably sent out of a kind of embarrassment or whatever.
He was a good guy. He's a good guy, I'm sure. I haven't talked to him. But
for not having done the research he should have done before the article.
Yeah.
But the check was made out to Nick Manhattan, so...
Yeah, no account under Nick Manhattan. Okay. So we still have the check, uncashed.
Right.
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to be the first to throw stones at Dick Hebdige, believe me. So, what?
No, nothing. Who's throwing stones
No,
at him?
I just
Who's
feel,
throwing stones?
I feel a little bad right now. Because, you know, partially it's the anger about everything.
Especially back then.
It goes towards that saying, which is, you know, one of the 4 agreements. It's never personal. It's never about you. It's about the person being angry at you, not about you. You know, that's how I feel about that right now, about everything. All right, so on Sunday, January 24th, 1993, so about 3 months after we erected that memorial teepee to Mr. Lee, I started writing again.
So only 3 months after?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it's best to just read straight from the journal just to give you a sense of those final days. What it mostly highlights is what's been the biggest theme all along, which is my love for my neighbors. Yeah. It still warms my heart when I read it today, right? So I said, haven't spent any time in the hill in months. In fact, the teepee isn't even done inside yet. Nick tries to go on a regular basis, but I just can't bring myself. There's another onslaught by the press a few weeks ago because of another rumor that it was all coming down. But we don't take these things seriously anymore. Too little, too late. Lots more fires and too much to catch up on and nothing, I wrote. And then I said, but the reason I wanted to write once more is that I went up there again Saturday and realized how much I missed the place. Because the fact is that many of these people are my friends who we shared so much with. And I suddenly remembered how and why I used to try to write so much, how good I felt, and how I wanted to capture and remember how funny and heartwarming these friends are. Sammy greeted me warmly and talked to me for about a half an hour. We reminisced. He showed me a picture of his baby, Samantha. I asked about Lisa, and he told me she was staying in La Ponderosa right now. Are they back together? He shrugged. Then Juan came over, and Sammy says, hey, Juan, go and see your mother. Maybe she'll give you $5 for crack. And Juan says, I already did today. And I'm saying, nothing's changed. We talked about teepees then and now, and how the compound had changed hut-wise. They've been cleaning a lot. There was tons of garbage by the front wall again. Sammy claims still that the giant garbage pile is going to be next. Yeah, sure. We reminisced about Ali, whose hut burned down and created that trash dump. And then Mo came around and hugged me and talked about his favorite subject, how Nick is worthless as a worker and only supervises and wouldn't ever get anything done without me. Naturally, I agreed. And we laughed and pointed at an unwitting Nick who was standing out of earshot. Then Mo left for a few minutes and came back with that blue plate that I had talked about, Blue Collector's Christmas plate from 1971 that he wanted me to have. I mentioned it a few episodes ago. You sure? I said, yeah, it would only get busted around here, but only if you promise to come back soon. Then Louis came over, completely drunk. He literally ran up and hugged me. Sammy bragged about how Louis had built new huts and the wall out front, which we had dubbed the Great Wall of Chinatown when we drove by. Spencer had it built. Sammy said that Louis was a great carpenter, and he was. We were standing around the fire going on in the center of the hill in a barrel, and Louis talked about how his cats shiver and shake because of all of the firecrackers going off. This was around Chinese New Year. And we remembered and laughed about how Billy Toyota was so scared of those firecrackers, the tough guy. And then, meanwhile, Nick was talking to the little demon girl, Kia, half of the fake camcorder box making team. And then suddenly, Louis said he wanted to talk to me privately. And Sammy and I both laughed. Uh-oh. He asked me if I had grown up on a farm. I said, sort of. Why? Did I have chickens? Yeah, for a short while when I was very young. Well, do the eggs come out of, sorry, hope you don't mind my language, the anus, the asshole, sorry, or the other, the penis? Gee, Louis, I'm not sure. By the time I was old enough to wonder, we didn't have chickens anymore. Why? Well, Nick said they came out of the penis. He said the penis, really? Yeah, and I say the asshole. That's why they wash the eggs and why some people won't eat eggs. Like they won't drink milk because cows roll in the mud. Louis, I told you, don't ever believe anything Nick tells you.
Right, I told him they came out of a penis. Come on.
You probably messing with him.
Oh.
I wrote this,
Yeah, right.
so it came to...
Right.
Sammy talked about how the electric got overloaded and the wire burned out again recently and how they're still hooked up to the light pole. He also told about how he saw a raw-assed rat the other day and that it eats side by side with the cats. Nick had run into Red a few days before this. He was staying with Tony in his room. Sue was with somebody else by then. Red was limping pretty badly because his leg never healed right from when he fell trying to steal that security camera. Then 10 days later on February 3rd, I wrote, put up some lining, not the portraits, just plain canvas, and added rugs. Juan keeps bringing us stuff, part of a chain link fence. Hey, Nick, look what I got for you. Good for the teepee, huh? North Woodsman Tony stopped by. He was living with Red on 110th Street and was looking for a one-bedroom, but he looked terrible, just like Eddie and Hunka before they died. I wasn't even sure if it was Tony at first. Everybody was sick and dying, Again, not to go off on too long a tangent, but addiction is a disease. It's a horrible disease. And there's something evil about a society that tries to criminalize for the poor only, mind you, and declares war on something that it fundamentally supports on so many levels, both legal and illegal drugs, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But I also just want to quickly tell you about Hunka, even though that was from back in 91, but Hunka epitomizes everybody to me. So he said he was one of the first people on the Hill, and that he went away to jail, and that he had gotten out recently, and that he was married and with 2 kids. Yes, he told me all of this inside the teepee, where so many people just poured their heart and soul out to me, So he was married with 2 kids that adored him. He was HIV positive. But he wasn't afraid to die, he said, because he believed in God, but that he was sad for his family. He had told his oldest girl that he was dying, and when she asked why, He told her because he was a bad man. And everybody gets what they deserve. He said he was liked once, hardworking and honest, and that he hates liars, and that he himself is now a liar. It came pouring out of him like this long, rehearsed monologue. And when he was done, he said, "Thanks for listening to my bullshit. See you." And then he left. And it was so heartbreaking to me, you know, the self-loathing. And that really went for everybody on the Hill. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, right. So it was in February 3rd.
When I wrote that, right? No,
that's when you came back and you put up the, started fixing up the teepee again.
Yes, inside.
3 months. So this was like 3 months after we had erected the memorial to Mr. Lee. And just 2 days later.
After I put down the lining and the rugs and all of that.
Right. The teepee burned down.
It burned down.
Right. When we got there was nothing left except for the poles.
Literally nothing, though. No shreds, nothing.
And we talked to Louis, who said he had to leave during the fire, that it got so intense that he said 1 minute the teepee was there, and the next minute, poof, it was gone like magic. It disappeared.
Yeah.
It must have been the heat that
vinyl
that got caught inside the vinyl covered fabric
with no place to escape, so it radiated this intense heat.
Yeah, and so it got to a certain temperature where it just sort of exploded,
Disintegrated. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Juan told us that Shaft started the fire because he and Sammy smoked 7 bundles and had to cover it up because of Spencer. And then I ran into Sammy, who said, "Oh, what a shame. Somebody must have started the fire from the road trying to get revenge." Who knows, right? Who cares at this point?
So the Hill, with its charred upright teepee poles now at the center, stayed up for another half year or so. Just like that. We didn't go back.
No, that was it. We left then.
But we saw in the news and in articles that the Hill was being razed and the teepee poles were being crushed. And we have even a photo of a bulldozer sitting next to these
August 17th,
teepee poles.
1993. There's all these pictures and news articles. You know. The Hill was infamous by that point. Everybody had pictures, including the, I think we saw it on the 6 o'clock news even that night. I can't remember. Yeah. So now we want to tell you what happened to the people, as far as we know, starting with some of the peripheral sort of outside people who documented the story. Margaret Morton, who remained a dear friend. She was a tenured professor at Cooper Union, and she kept publishing and exhibiting her photographs of New York City's homeless population and lecturing and participating in panels on homelessness until she died in June 2020. Many of the photos in my books are hers. Yeah, she was a dear friend. And as well as Andreas Sturzing's photographs. His, in fact, are not only inside my book, they're the outside, back, and front cover. Yeah,
we met Andreas in 1987. He was a photographer sent and working for Der Spiegel, who were doing an article on Fassbender's Trash the City in Death.
On our production.
Yeah, we talked about that in episode 4, right?
Yeah, so he's currently He's currently a senior lecturer at Falmouth University in Cornwall, England, and remains a good friend. And we have plans to see him shortly. Yeah. And then there's Jim Lardner, who spent 6 months researching and writing that New Yorker article on the Hill. He founded inequality.org and is a senior fellow at Demos. He's written a number of books, including NYPD, A City and Its Police. He too was a former cop. And he continues to write for various publications, including The New Yorker.
Yeah, and Dan Hayes, who wrote 5 articles for the Daily News, trying to get through that blue wall there on the silence of the cops, right? After Mr. Lee's murder. He's retired now and living in East Hampton.
Our friends John and Annie, who were married in South Dakota and who met Leola One Feather first, have since divorced. John is still a filmmaker living in New York, and Annie doesn't act much anymore, but she's a photographer and writer living mostly in Marseille, France. And we're still friends with both of them. In fact, recently we just reminisced about the Hill with each of them just prior to doing this podcast, right?
And as far as the people on the Hill, Indian Jim died sometime in the summer of '91, so pretty early on. There were a lot of versions of the story. Louis said he got his settlement from a accident he had a few years earlier, $30,000. He left without saying goodbye or giving Louis any of the money like he had promised he would.
Right, that's what they had agreed on. And Louis was really sad about it because they had known each other for so long and it didn't seem to mean a thing to Jim, Louis thought. And then, of course, after that, he had nobody to hang with. The word was that Jim wanted to return to his family in Florida, but that they didn't want anything to do with him. So he went upstate to Monticello. He had about $3,000 on him when he died there of a heart attack. And I told the story one time in a monologue that I was doing in the play that we did on the Hill, and everybody started laughing. And it really caught me off guard and momentarily really saddened me, but I guess there's something absurd about an alcoholic waiting for years for a settlement and then dying of a heart attack when he gets it. Ha ha, right?
Yes, yeah. But you know, Jim's running partner, Louis, or we know his full name, Louis Watson.
Yeah, the only one whose full name we know.
Yeah, because he was sort of the professional homeless. He was the subject of so many news articles and documentaries and whatever. He was there when the Hill was raised on August 17th, 1993.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, there's pictures of him in the news.
Yeah, with his cat. Happily, he managed to rescue his cat, Thomas, a white cat. There's a picture of him with his cat, right, from the rubble. And he later showed up periodically in news articles and a documentary, the one we saw.
By Keiko.
Yeah, right. And until he was found drowned in the East River, at the banks of the East River, underneath the Manhattan Bridge. There was homeless encampments were down in there. So he probably, after the Hill was raised, he probably went down there and was living. You know, that section of the East River where the homeless encampments was, it has like a 12-foot concrete embankment. Yeah. So if he would have fell in, whether he was drunk or sober or somebody pushed him or whatever, he wouldn't have been able to get up. So he would have drowned right there in the spot where they found him, I guess. Right.
So Ace was HIV positive, so we just assumed he eventually died of AIDS. But somebody recently, responding to this podcast, reached out and told us something weird. I don't know. He said that at the time he had an addicted girlfriend and he'd sometimes go on rescue missions to the Hill to go get her, which is how he got to know Ace. And according to him, Ace was shot in the back of the head one day in the East Village. Yeah,
but this same guy also told us that Larry, the somewhat violent guy that was pimping...
also nice, though. Sometimes. Complicated guy.
Yeah, who pimped out Elaine, was really an undercover cop, which is total bullshit because him and Elaine had a relationship, and it's just totally absurd. So it makes this story about, that guy's story about Ace, seem unbelievable, less believable.
Less believable.
And although it'd be no surprise if Ace did die violently, he was in a lot of fights up at the Hill.
Absolutely, and his whole life. Sorry,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, his whole life was one of violence. You know, sorry.
Yeah, no.
All his life, you know. So Eddie, one of the four brothers that we called the James Gang, or the old washerwoman, as everybody called him. He died relatively early on as well. In late October of '91, he succumbed to AIDS. I remember seeing him on the Hill just a few weeks before. He was just skin and bones and barely recognizable also.
And we learned when we went back to the Hill after that 6-month break that little small Sue and Northwoodsman Tony had both also died of AIDS.
Right. And interestingly, we ran into Billy Toyota at that point as well, and he was back out of jail on some deal and still doing his hustle. And he was the one, if you might recall from way back early episode, that Red was worried about that he was going to die in jail, right? Because he was HIV positive. But he looked really thin and pale and was clearly still fighting AIDS.
Yeah, so this HIV, or, AIDS, the late stage of HIV infection, was the #1 cause of death among Americans aged 25 to 44. That was in, the early 90s.
Yeah.
And there was a drug for treating it, HIV back then, but this drug, AZT, was also at that time the most expensive prescription drug in history. In today's dollars, its 1-year price tag was $16,500.
Right, so nobody on the Hill was going to be able to afford that. So
Tito, Red, Ivan, the brothers, Tony Sue, were all heroin addicts and HIV positive. So although we don't really know, we assumed, as they themselves did, that they would all eventually die of AIDS. Everyone else we had come to know up on the Hill, the geomancer, Ali, Elaine, Juan, Sammy, Chinese Jimmy, Mo, Cano, Spencer, the Tony Panama and Shaft, Dip, that bully Tony. We don't know anything about how their lives worked out or what happened to them.
Right. So one of my last entries in the journal, I wrote, Nick and I never did get the closure we wanted. Real life defies neat endings.
Yeah, except, what is real life? I mean, it's the life...
The blue pill or the red pill, you mean?
No, well, yeah, that too. But the life you live, your memories, your reflections on that life and the people who shaped it. So the people on the Hill, right? Both the conscious and unconscious reservoir of all the feelings and, thoughts and memories that push you on for the rest of your life, the rest of your journey, right?
Right. So I wrote this near the end of the journal. Magically and as mysteriously as the whole experience of the Hill itself unfolded, the billboard above the site eventually changed back to what it was on the photo that had blown up on Nick's feet on Canal Street so long ago. A Winston ad, only this time with Winston's new logo. An eagle and a turtle. And except for the fact that we have proof of this, it sounds like we made it up.
Right, because
like
we
a film script or something.
We had never seen the Winston ad up there. All we saw it was in this photograph that blew up on our feed.
Yes.
When it was the Hill there was one on real estate or something, but we had never seen it, but now here it was back again, as if there was no time, or time was coming in.
Yes, and it had an eagle and a turtle in it.
Right.
We should have taken pictures of it later when it was up there. We do have. You can research Winston and see that they have an ad campaign with an eagle and a turtle, and yes, it is magic, right? And I hooked a rag rug in the shape of a teepee, and with the design of the second cover, that memorial to Mr. Lee, using the clothes that we wore on the Hill, cut into strips. And that rag rug still hangs in our apartment. And I was inspired by Nick's grandmother, who hooked hundreds of them in her lifetime. And it was kind of my chosen form of therapy. And I hooked these words in the semicircle part of it, which is the dedication that Nick came up with.
Right. Yeah, it was more an invocation, because I was trying to find some hope, or I saw some hope in all the hopelessness. I mean, I was thinking of Mr. Lee, who remains eternally, present in my mind. He was present in my mind then and still now. Streets blossom where you roam, until timeless spring, now golden wings unfold.
Right.
That was a thing that, it means something now. It meant a lot more back then. It's just like how...
We look at it every day on our wall. You know?
Yeah, it's just, you know, people stay with you your whole life. They're the people you love, right?
So, as we said, the hill was raised in August of '93, and that following Thanksgiving was the 3-year anniversary of when we erected the teepee. And that day we climbed over this cyclone fence that they had put around the hill area, the now lifeless, plowed over hill area. And we dug a hole at the site of Mr. Lee's hut, and we planted a small white pine tree right near the tree whose roots we found when we were digging inside the teepee.
Yeah. Yeah, this was the tree, the roots we found was a tree that they said had been hit by lightning.
Yeah.
And that's when it came down. But before that, they had put up decorations, Christmas tree decorations, you know, at Christmas. But again, the evergreens, they symbolize immortality, just as a symbol, because they keep their leaves all winter, right? But to the Iroquois people, the white pine is a symbol of the great peace that unified their separate nations into one league. And I mean, we have a picture of that white pine, including the blank billboard in preparation of the new Winston ad that would later have the turtle and eagle on it. But that white pine didn't last long. It was that summer, in summer of '94, the white pine we planted also died.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, again, just all these synchronicities, it does remind me, though, of also black elk. You know, there is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead.
Right.
You know,
exactly. Right.
Still can't help but think of that. So in ending this episode and this podcast, there's just one more story we want to relate to you. Speaking of synchronicities and full circles, and it happened recently. For us, the timing of it all bears paying attention to. They say the universe sends you clues and that there's providence at work in your life if you just know how to listen. So,
right, and it's again difficult for us to ignore the synchronicity of everything in this. I mean, just a few weeks ago, our close friend and Thieves Theatre co-founder, Tanush Kohli, died suddenly of a heart attack. Gabriele, he and I had met in a production of The Balcony at the university where our mutual friend, Chris Harris, was a professor at the time. He was the director. And we all worked together on Thieves Theatre inaugural production of Janae's Death Watch at Illinois State Penitentiary.
Yep. Chris directed that too. And but we had reconnected with Tanush 7 years ago and saw him on a regular basis since then. So in the summer of 2016, we went to his son's wedding in Toronto, the city where we spent so much time together doing theater back in the 80s. And then later that year, in 2016, we actually visited him in India. Toronto and Lucknow, India were the two cities where he split much of his time. And we last saw him just this past December in Toronto to see his first grandchild. So we were deeply, deeply grateful for that, at least.
Yeah, strangely, incredibly, I don't know what the right adverb is for the synchronicity or whatever, but just this past April, we were tearing down the set of our annual Coney Island Ritual Cabaret that we do each year. And the material was mylar.
Yeah, which is that mirrored.
Right. Which was the main element in this set at Coney Island Ritual Cabaret, but also was Tanush's design of the balcony. He was the designer of the balcony, and he had put mylar as the center kind of thing of, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember back then, well, we won't go into it, but Tanush's design was just so brilliant. And everybody thought it was really expensive, and then he was saying Mylar doesn't cost that much. Well, it cost a little bit, but not that much. We were saving the Mylar, though.
Yes, yes.
And then when we were saving this Mylar from the Coney Island Rich Cabaret,
which our designer came up with independently, by the way.
Right. We said, well, this is the one Tanoush used. Why don't we do another production of The Balcony? So instead of doing the Ritual Cabaret each year, we talked to Adam Reelman, the artistic director at Coney Island. We said, next year we want to do a theater production. And so we set up doing The Balcony in December of 2024.
Yes.
And and through that, we contacted Chris Harris again, who we hadn't contacted in 40-some years.
Right.
And we wanted to get some production photos from him from the original Balcony, because he had taken all the photos. And we contacted him and telling him we were going to do another production. But at the same time, now, just a couple weeks ago, we contacted him again because we told him that Tanoush had died. Right.
Yeah.
And then he wrote back to us.
He wrote something remarkable back for me, speaking of like paying attention to the universe, right? He said, oh, fuck, shit and damnation. I have now lost, quote unquote, another colleague and friend. This has been a hard couple of years where my mortality and that of those around me is brought startlingly home. I have, over the last few years, increasingly found consolation and reassurance in the philosophy of the, quote, casual drift of things. A phrase I filched from the English professor John Gray. In his book, Straw Dogs, he wrote this paragraph that spoke volumes to me and still does. Quote, we are not authors of our lives. We are not even part authors of the events that mark us most deeply. Nearly everything that is most important in our lives is unchosen. The time and place we are born, our parents, the first language we speak, these are chance, not choice. It is the casual drift of things that shapes our most faithful relationships. The life of each of us is a chapter of accidents. That's the end of John Gray's quote, and then Chris continues, it reminds me to be prepared for the randomness of life. You do what you can with the circumstances that present themselves. It also resonates in harmony with the words of Hamlet when he returns to court in Act 5. Not a whit, we defy augury. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all.
Yeah.
The readiness is all. And that's the end of...
Yeah, and the Hamlet words come just before he's about to die, right?
Yes, in the last act, yeah. Hamlet finally stops trying to control things and decides that, yes, to accept the notion of fate. And again, the idea being to be prepared for the randomness of life, the casual drift of things, or providence, depending on what you believe. So anyway, that was Chris's email. That resonated with me because of the timing of it all, And not just as it relates to the loss of Tanoush, but also in trying to make sense of our work on the Hill, the loss of Mr. Lee, the very reason for this podcast, to try and make sense of it all. And here come Chris's words, right?
But, I mean, what does it all mean? But randomness, no, I can't accept that. There are too many clues, signs that foreshadow your fate, right? This is for me where free will comes in, if there's free will. You can either ignore or follow these metaphysical messages that are sent to you and try to act in concert with them in some way. Like that print that magically blew up on my feet.
Yes.
I have to keep it the whole time we're on the hill and relate to it.
Which nobody would believe. It sounds made up.
Right.
A print blew up, for those of you who don't remember,
but I mean, but how do you...
5-6 years earlier.
But, but you can't really... you act in concert with it. I don't mean that. You just sort of enter into the mystery of it all and sort of dance with your destiny. So you keep this print and you keep relating to it and dancing with it, right? And what does it mean doing this Thieves Theatre podcast now, and Tanush dying as we complete the last couple episodes?
Yes, we're called International Culture Lab now. We haven't been Thieves Theatre since 2007. How
does this loss of Tanush intersect with us examining our grief and loss over Mr. Lee and, you know, decades earlier? So the synchronicities and offer mysteries that can't be easily unraveled and understood.
No, and it's been really hard doing this podcast, diving into it all again. But I'll tell you what's even harder, ending it. You know, 30 years later, there's still no grand revelation, no like scales falling off the eyes and awakening to what you did. Much like life itself, the picture is super muddy, and the story in so many ways is anticlimactic. But here's the other thing, right, about this author, John Gray, that I found interesting, because books are really hard to end too, especially books that delve heavily into the philosophies of the world, right, and are so complicated. And this is how John Gray decided to end his book. Other animals do not need a purpose in life. The human animal cannot do without one. Can we not think of the aim of life as being simply to see? Question mark.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of what our answer used to be when we first got to the Hill. And people asked us, what are you trying to do? And we'd answer, I don't know, be here, live here, interact with people, see what happens, right?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that's, I mean, still enough in this podcast is just...
Maybe that's all that it was, and maybe that's perfect, right? But yeah, the synchronicities, the mysteries do reconnect you to a sense of awe, right? To a sense of being guided and a sense of that someday, somewhere on some plane or another, the big picture is all going to become revealed to you, right?
Right. And as far as Mr. Lee specifically, during the writing of this last episode, which we've been at for quite a while now, we rewatched Dances with Wolves. And it was just as beautiful now as we had remembered it back then. It had premiered.
Speaking of synchronicity.
Right. It had premiered on the day we erected a teepee, Thanksgiving in 1990.
Yes.
Right. And the film's ending seems fitting here because it wraps this up too. And it echoes the geomancer's words after the death of Mr. Lee. We saw him come out on the roof of his hut, and he shouted the first words that anyone had ever heard him speak. He said, "He was my friend. We were soldiers together. He was my brother."
Yes, and as Kevin Costner's character is riding away for the last time from the Lakota village and the family and the people that he now belonged to, his friend, wind in his hair, is shouting from the top of a nearby cliff, bidding farewell. And he says, this is all in Lakota, you know, Shung mani tu tanka opwachi, Shung mani tu tanka opwachi, dances with wolves, dances with wolves. I am wind in his hair. Do you see that I am your friend? Do you see that you will always be my friend?
Yeah. Tortuga de luna, Tortuga del sol. The argument continues.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Again, feel free to write us about this or any topic or episode, podcast at thievestheatre.org. We'd love to hear from you. We'll come back on occasion, so subscribe and hit that bell so that you'll know when we do.
Yeah, check out our website at thievestheatre.org and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TP on the Hill. That's TIPI on the Hill.
Thank you so much for your time.
And listening to this podcast. Thank you.